followed him, attached to one tentacle. Finally, John and his guide entered a circular room, bright with light, streaming from a glass-like, bulging skylight. They apparently were near topside of the vessel. A steel blue, more massive than his guide and with 4 more pairs of tentacles, including 2 short ones that grew from the top of its head, spoke out.
"This is the violator."
John Steel Blue nodded.
"You know the penalty. Carry it out. He also is an inhabitant of this system,"
John's guide added.
"Examine him first, then give him the death."
John Carl shrugged as he was led from the lighted room through more corridors. If it got too bad, he still had the subray pistol. Anyway, he was curious. He'd taken on the lonely, nerve-wracking job of service station attendant just to see what it offered. Here was a part of it, and it was certainly something new.
"This is the examination room,"
his Steel Blue said, almost contemptuously. A green effulgence surrounded him. There was a hiss simultaneously as the tiny microphones on the outside of his suit picked up the hiss. He felt a chill go through his body. Then it seemed as if a half-dozen hands were inside him, examining his internal organs. His stomach contracted. He felt a squeeze on his heart. His lungs tickled. There were several more queer motions inside his body. Then another Steel Blue voice said,
"He is a soft metal creature, made up of metals that melt at a very low temperature. He also contains a liquid whose markup I cannot ascertain by ray probe. Bring him back when the torture is done."
John Carl grinned a little trifly. What kind of torture could this be? Would it last 21 days? He glanced at the chronometer on his wrist. John's Steel Blue led him out of the alien ship and halted expectantly just outside the ship's lock. John waited too. He thought of the subray pistol holstered in his hip. Shoot my way out? It'd be fun while it lasted. But he toted up the disadvantages. He either would have had to find a hiding space in the asteroid, and if the Steel Blue wanted him bad enough, they could tear the whole place to pieces, or somehow get aboard the little life ship hidden in the service station. In that, he would just be a sitting duck. He struggled off the slight temptation to use the pistol. He was still curious. And he was interested in staying alive as long as possible. There was a remote chance he might warn the SP ship. Unconsciously, he glanced towards his belt to see the little power pack which, if under ideal conditions, could finger out 50,000 miles into space. If he could somehow stay alive the 21 days, he might be able to warn the patrol. He couldn't do it by attempting to flee, for his life would be snuffed out immediately. The Steel Blue said quietly,
"It might be ironical to let you warn that SP ship you keep thinking about, but we know your weapons now. Already our ship is equipped with a force field designed especially to deflect your atomic guns."
John Carl covered up his thoughts quickly. They can delve deeper than the surface of the mind. Or wasn't I keeping a leash on my thoughts? The Steel Blue chuckled.
"You get absent-minded, is it? Every once in a while."
Just then, 4 other Steel Blues appeared, lugging great sheets of plastic and various other equipments. They dumped their loads and began unbundling them. Working swiftly, they built a plastic igloo, smaller than the living room on the larger service station igloo. They ranged instruments inside. One of them John Carl recognized as an air pump from within the station. And they laid out a pallet. When they were done, John saw a miniature reproduction of the service station, lacking only the cannon cap and fin, and with clear plastic walls instead of the opaqueness of the other. His Steel Blue said,
"We have reproduced the atmosphere of your station so you can be watched while you undergo the torture under the normal conditions of your life."
"What is this torture?" John Carl asked. The answer was almost caressing.
"It is a liquid we use to dissolve metals. It causes joints to harden if even so much as a drop remains on it long. It eats away the metal, leaving a scaly residue which crumbles, eventually into dust. We will dilute it with a harmless liquid for you, since number 1 does not wish you to die instantly. Enter your..."
The Steel Blue hesitated.
"Mausoleum. You die in your own atmosphere. However, we took the liberty of purifying it. There were dangerous elements in it."
John walked into the little igloo. The Steel Blues sealed the lock, fingered dials and switches on the outside. John's spacesuit deflated. Pressure was building up in the igloo. He took a sample of the air, found it was good, although quite rich in oxygen compared to what he'd been using in the service station in his suit. With a sigh of relief, he took off his helmet and gulped huge draughts of air. He sat down on the pallet and waited for the torture to begin. The Steel Blues crowded about the igloo, staring at him through elliptical eyes. Apparently, they too were waiting for the torture to begin. John thought the excess of oxygen was making him lightheaded. He stared at a cylinder which was beginning to sprout tentacles from the center. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. An opening, like the adjustable eyepiece of a space scope, was appearing in the center of the cylinder. A square glass-like tumbler sat in the opening, disclosed a 4-foot cylinder that had sprouted tentacles. It contained a yellowish liquid. One of the tentacles reached into the opening and clasped the glass. The opening closed, and the cylinder, propelled by locomotor appendages, moved towards John. He didn't like the looks of the liquid in the tumbler. It looked like an acid of some sort. He raised to his feet. He unsheathed the subray pistol and prepared to blast the cylinder. The cylinder moved so fast John felt his eyes jump in his head. He brought the subray gun up, but he was helpless. The pistol kept on going up. With a deft movement, one of the tentacles had speared it from his hand and was holding it out of his reach. John kicked at the glass in the cylinder's hand, but he was too slow. 2 tentacles gripped the kicked leg. Another struck him in the chest, knocking him to the pallet. The same tentacle, assisted by a new one, pinioned his shoulders. 4 tentacles held him supine. The cylinder lifted a glass-like cap from the tumbler of liquid. Lying there helplessly, John was remembering an old fairy tale he'd read as a kid. Something about a fellow named Socrates, who was given a cup of hemlock to drink. It was the finish for Socrates, but the old hero had been nonchalant and calm about the whole thing. With a sigh, John Carl, who was curious unto death, relaxed and said, "All right, bub, you don't have to force-feed me. I'll take it like a man." The cylinder apparently understood him, for it handed him the tumbler. It even reholstered his subray pistol. John brought the glass of liquid under his nose. The fumes of the liquid were pungent. It brought tears to his eyes. He looked at the cylinder, then at the Steel Blues crowding into the plastic goo. He waved the glass at the audience. "To Earth, ever triumphant," he toasted. Then he drained the glass in a gulp. It was bitter, and he felt hot prickles jab at his scalp. It was like eating very hot peppers. His eyes filled with tears. He coughed as the stuff went down. But he was still alive. He thought in amazement. He'd drunk the hemlock and was still alive. The reaction set in quickly. He hadn't known until then how tense he'd been. Now, with the torture ordeal over, he relaxed. He laid down on the pallet and went to sleep. It was one lone Steel Blue watching him when he rubbed the sleep out of his eyes and sat up. He vanished almost instantly. He, or another like him, returned immediately, accompanied by a half-dozen other, including the multi-tentacled creature known as Number 1. One said,
"You are alive."
The thought registered amazement.
"When you lost consciousness, we thought you had,"
There was a hesitation.
"as you say, died."
"No," John Carl said. "I didn't die. I was just plain dead beat, so I went to sleep." The Steel Blues apparently didn't understand.
"Good it is that you live. The torture will continue,"
spoke Number 1 before loping away. The cylinder business began again. This time, John drank the bitter liquid slowly, trying to figure out what it was. It had a familiar, tantalizing taste, but he couldn't quite put a taste finger on it. His belly said he was hungry. He glanced at his chronometer. Only 20 days left before the SP ship arrived. Would this torture, he chuckled, last until then? But he was growing more and more conscious that his belly was screaming for hunger. The liquid had taken the edge off his thirst. It was on the 5th day of his torture that John Carl decided he was going to get something to eat or perish in the attempt. The cylinder sat passively in its niche on the circle. A dozen Steel Blues were watching as John put on his helmet and unsheathed his stub ray. They merely watched as he pressed the stub ray's firing stud. Invisible rays licked out of the bulbous muzzle of the pistol. The plastic splintered. John was out of the goldfish bowl and striding towards his own igloo adjacent to the service station when a Steel Blue accosted him. "Out of the way," John grunted, waving the stub ray. "I'm hungry."
"I'm the first Steel Blue you met,"
said the creature who barred his way.
"Go back to your torture."
"But I'm so hungry I'll chew off one of your tentacles and eat it without seasoning."
"Eat?"
The Steel Blue sounded puzzled. "I want to refuel. I've got to have food to keep my engine going." Steel Blue chuckled.